Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me, whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording. I appreciate you watching. Today we're going to try to have a relatively short live class. I want to just do a little bit more about affordances, signifiers, and feedback here for a little bit. And then we're going to move into talking about wireframes just a little bit. I want to show you all an easy way to kind of make some wireframes. Or at least easy for you if you are kind of used to some other pieces of software that's out there. Basically PowerPoint, right? Let's talk a little bit about affordances, signifiers, and feedback here. Because basically these three topics are going to be our big three topics to talk about when we're talking about design. So I want to make sure that you all have a good understanding of what these three topics or what these three things are. And we can look at some different examples of them in on the web, basically. So let's take some time and do that here. But we are looking at these as sort of the foundations of interaction. If my slide will choose to advance here. The foundations of interaction. So we have affordances and signifiers. These are our input functions. And then we have feedback, which is an output function. Right? So affordances and signifiers are information that we present to users to demonstrate how inputs should happen. Whereas feedback presents successful or failed input, right? So it is the output that you get from an input. And so I want to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page here with affordances, signifiers, and feedback. When it comes to affordances, an affordance is what something looks like it does. Right? So when I see something in the wild, when I see something that has been designed, I should probably say, right? Whether it is a website or it is a product, what I do is I develop what we call a system image of that product or of that website. And as I'm developing that system image, this comes from my ability to take in the affordances and signifiers of this site or this thing, right? And so when we look at affordances as a concept, one of the examples that I always give is a mug, right? Because, I find that it is most likely that nobody ever taught you how to use a mug. But you were able to figure it out pretty easily. And that's because when you look at a mug, you see that there are very clear parts of the mug that, you just kind of understand just by looking at it. This is how the mug is supposed to work. Right? So when we look at a mug, we see, well, we've got this big open area. We know that a mug is supposed to be utilized for, drinking a beverage. And so one of the first questions that we might ask ourselves would be, if we were using a mug for the very first time, where does the beverage go? Well, there's really only one place for it to go, and this big well that's a part of the cup. Right? Nobody's telling you to put the beverage there. Nobody is showing you. There aren't any instructions. that come with the mug that tell you this is where the drink goes. You just know instinctively that this is where the drink goes because it's the big well that's in the cup. And then you have the handle, right? And the handle is the place that you hold it. And a handle gives an affordance of holding, right? It's protruding off of the mug. It is looped. It is roughly sized to fit 2, 3, or 4 fingers, depending on the size of the mug. So we know based on what this handle looks like, what we're supposed to do with it. Even if we didn't have any other context of what a mug was, any other context of what a handle is, it just looks like something that's supposed to be done with this part of the mug, just because it fits, right? So instinctually, that's what we do with it. And so when I'm talking about affordances, I'm talking about what something looks like it does, and in turn, that gets us to the place where we're saying, well, what instinctually does the design of this item communicate about to us? And that gets us that concept there. We follow that up with signifiers, right? So if an affordance is what something looks like it does, a signifier is what something is labeled as doing, or what it tells us that something does. Right? And so one of the biggest examples that I can give, one of the biggest and best examples that I can give of both of these sort of objects would be a button. So let me see what I can do here about pulling up a little code window that we can kind of examine here. So if we look at a button on a website, right, we can see good examples of affordances and of signifiers. So based on the existence of a button, let's just code a button in here really quickly. We won't put any text into it yet. Let's give it a little bit of styling, just a little bit of a width and height so we can actually see it in our site. And so let's have a look at this button. And so when we look at this button, just based on this, the existence of this shape, we can kind of see several things going on here, right? You know, we have this sort of gradient that we see here, right? Like if you look really closely, you can see that at the top, it is a lighter gray. Toward the bottom, it's a slightly darker gray. We also have this even darker gray border around it, and this is done to suggest a little bit of depth. It's done to suggest a little bit of depth. And what this depth is supposed to be mimicking is a regular button. Like if you think about an arcade cabinet button, right? We can look at one of these arcade cabinet buttons and we can see like, okay, we have this similar sort of structure, right? In this case, these are round buttons instead of square buttons, but we can see that, you know, the faces of the buttons have this sort of gradient on them. There is a border around them because it is, you know, going back into the greater part of the button where the switches reside in the housing. And so the idea of our digital button is to mimic that physical button in appearance. Right? And there's actually a big term that we use for this, which is SKUOMORPHISM. Skeuomorphism. Right? Skeuomorphism is the kind of term that is the term for what we're kind of looking at, where we are designing an interface element so that it resembles something in the real world. So when we're talking about the affordances of a button having this perceived depth, having this border around it, so it actually looks like a real button on an appliance or on an arcade cabinet. This is tying, and this is something that we talk about a little bit more later on as well. You'll read more about it in your Design of Everyday Things book, the idea of knowledge in the head versus knowledge in the world, right? And so we use general knowledge of objects in the world to support new experiences on websites. Now, with skeuomorphism itself and like the design fad, this was a big fad 10, 15 years ago. Right? Where it was kind of it was very literal and very overdone. Where, like, if I was trying to make an app icon for a pool game, for example, I would make the app icon look like felt, like the felt on a pool table, or I would, make something look like real wood on a digital surface as much as I possibly could, if it was resembling something that was made of wood. Right? And so that's kind of skeuomorphism taken to the extremes, but at its core, again, it's just basically meaning to resemble something that's realistic, something that's from the real world. So when we think about our digital button, this is giving us that affordance because we have the knowledge in the head of a button existing and it has similar characteristics. But then at the same time, we end up with knowledge in the world because I can type text onto this button. I can type click me right onto this button. And that will add that text to the button. So now not only does the button have the affordance of clickability, but it has the signifier. It actually has the label of the fact that this is supposed to be clicked. So I can draw inference that this is a thing that should be clicked, and I'm being specifically told that this should be clicked. So in a singular web element here, we're seeing both examples of affordances and of signifiers in the one item here. And the response after interacting with an element, we call that the feedback. Right? That's the response that we get after an input. And feedback can be incredibly important, right? Because if we're interacting with an element, if something has an affordance that it does something, or even if something has a signifier that it does something, we need confirmation of our beliefs. We need to be reassured that we took the right action. So if a button has the affordability of being able to click it, right, or being able to press it, then upon pressing that button, we should get some sort of feedback so that we can know that we took the right action. And so there's probably several times where you've tried to engage in some sort of designed element that maybe looks like it's supposed to do one thing and simply does not. Right, and that makes things especially challenging. So if we look back at our button here, we see we can get some feedback just by interacting with it. I take my mouse, I hover over it, I get an immediate hover state. Right, that light gray to dark gray coloring changes to a light blue. So this is already some feedback that I'm receiving that's telling me that, this is, again, interactable, and not only is it interactable, I am interacting with it in the proper way. And when I click down on it, we can see it changes color again, right? It's actually turning dark blue when I click down. And so we can kind of think about that in relation to our real physical buttons again, right? Like if I have a real physical button and it's sort of standing up, it might be lit up, it might just have a different shine on it, and then when I press it down, it might be going down into the housing of the button. So it might have a bit of a shadow cast on it, right? But these are all, again, feedback mechanisms that are showing me that, what I thought I should do with this button in terms of clicking the button, that's what I should do with the button. Right? And then typically something also happens, right? After you click the button. After you click the button, something happens. Whether you get taken to a new site, something downloads, something else comes up on the screen. That, again, is even more feedback. Oftentimes, and it's something that we'll discuss in the future, one of the things that we need to do as designers and developers is to work with something in the background, right? So I need to, upon an event like a button being pressed on a website, I need something to happen in the background before something else happens. Or before my user gets that thing that they want. And so it becomes important then to consider the concept of feedback and actually adding additional things to the user experience in those cases, where if it actually is going to take some time to complete the action, then we need to show them some sort of feedback in the meantime before the action completes. And this is where we get the idea of things like little spinny wheels that you might see on websites or in apps, little loading bars, little spinning wheels. This is giving us feedback, intermediate feedback, to let the user know that, hey, you did the right thing. You performed the function that you should have performed. And now there's some work I have to do before I can give you the output, but I'm working on it. And so it shows it there, right? And so that is significant. One place where we see these concepts kind of in conflict is with the idea of Norman doors. Right? And with Norman doors, essentially what we see is a door with an action that is in conflict with its affordance. And an example is the one that you see on the slide here, right? So there is a difference in the type of handle that you use generally for pull doors and for push doors. Push doors generally have the bar that goes across or some sort of horizontal opening mechanism, whereas pull doors have a vertical opening mechanism typically, or some sort of bar like you see depicted in the picture here. So the affordance of the door handles in this picture is telling me that this is a pull door. I mean, what it looks like should happen is I should be able to wrap my hand around this door handle and swing it open. But if we look here at the signifier on the door, we see that this is a push door. And so this door with its handle is in conflict with what we normally would consider a push door to be. As a push door, I'm typically going to use both hands, so I'm going to need a bigger place to put my hand. I'm going to need to be able to apply pressure differently. And most often, what you see from a user is that they're going to employ what we term quick start behavior. So you're just going to try to jump in and try to do something before doing any reading. So if I walk up to this door, I'm going to try to interact with this door instinctually before reading the sign on the door. So I'm going to do like we thought about doing there a minute ago. I'm going to grab the door. I'm going to try to pull it open, and it's not going to pull open because it's a push door. So me just kind of going and meeting resistance in the door is the feedback that I get. Now, it's not necessarily good feedback, right? Because I try to do the thing that I think I'm supposed to do, and it won't open. So where does my mind go, right? Maybe the door is locked. Maybe the door is broken. And that's perhaps when I take a second look at the door and I see, oh, it says push. And that's when, after briefly feeling a little embarrassed, I push the door and go the opposite direction. And the fact that the door swings wide then becomes my feedback in this case. So the affordance is in conflict with the signifier, and it's in conflict with the intended action. So as we're designing something, and we're designing actions and workflows, we want to make sure that the affordances that we put into our design match up with what we want our users to be able to do. Because if they don't, we end up with the same feeling that we get when we try to pull a push door, as in this, as you know, kind of in this instance, right? We get a little embarrassed, we get a little frustrated. It's no fun, right? And the more frustration we cause, the more opportunity that we give our users to leave the site. And so we've already talked about the idea of buttons and using that in the web. But there are all sorts of other things that we can use this with. So like especially if you're watching the recording of the video right now, I'd like you to kind of pause for just a minute and think about all the different things that you see on the web that have an interaction to them. And whether or not the affordances presented to you by that item makes sense. All right, so let's take just a second here. We'll take just a second here live and pause the video and think about it for a couple minutes if you're watching the recording. Maybe take and write a few things down. But we'll give it just a second here live. So let's look at a few things. Let's look at a few elements, and we can kind of determine, what our affordances and signifiers are. We have some good examples here. One of the things that we see here, a good example is what we have here in color coding. We see affordances and signifiers. So we're not just going to use, so we know from other classes and other things that we've done that using just color is not a great idea to give us the ability to present a message to our users. But if we use color as an affordance and provide a signifier with it, then that does pretty well, right? Because we have good knowledge in the world about certain colors, right? Like if we see red, we figure something's wrong. If we see green, we figure everything's good. If we see yellow, we think warning, right? We kind of relate these to traffic signs, traffic lights. And so we take the affordance that the color provides, we couple that with the signifier of the label, and we have a good UI element. Some other things that we see are like drop downs. If you see a drop down, your drop down gives you a little indicator to the right hand side with a little down arrow to give you some indication that, hey, you're supposed to click this and this is going to expand out. And so this is more of a signifier, right, than it is an affordance. Visually, if I have no other pretext or no other knowledge about things like this on the web, I'm not necessarily going to know how to interact with it. But again, if I'm taking advantage of knowledge in the world, if I'm taking advantage of web patterns, which are all things that we'll talk about in the future, I should be able to see this and see the down arrow and see that, oh yeah, when I click that, I should expect something to extend downward from this that I can interact with. And those types of things, right? Same thing goes for kind of left arrow and right arrow. We've been accustomed to knowledge in the world of these being items that we use to advance or go back. Right? There's nothing inherent in its own, on its own that, an arrow going to the right means next page. But we've been accustomed to seeing that, and we end up with the knowledge that that's something that we should do with these elements. Same thing with the left arrow in previous page. Some other items that we see here, we see the scroll bar, we see download buttons, we see expanding navigation menus, video players. And all of these things have good examples of both affordances and signifiers. And then we see the feedback come as a result of interacting with these elements. And so that's affordances, signifiers, and feedback in a nutshell. And here's something that I would like you to practice. So if you're watching this video live, maybe take a screenshot of this, think about it. This might actually be in the course. But this is part of practicing this. So I want to say we do this discussion board activity. I want to call attention to it here. But I want you to take a website, point out examples of affordances, signifiers, and feedback on that website. So what are some things that items on this website looks like it does? What are some things that this website tells you the items on this site does? And how does it explain to you whether or not you did the right? So I also want to look briefly at wireframing. And I will use different software to kind of do this presentation about wireframing. Mockflow, which is linked in your module, is a really super simple tool that you can use to do some wireframing. Figma is one you may have heard of. I want to show you something today. I want to try to make it as easy as possible, especially for those who may have never used any software like this before. I want to use PowerPoint, and I want to show you how to do some stuff in PowerPoint. But really, when we're making a wireframe, all we're kind of doing is we're kind of establishing flows. We're putting things kind of where we want them. We're thinking about our affordances and signifiers without the real need to consider like design or making it look pretty or what color anything should be. Right? It's very low stakes. So your wireframe can be super simple. It can be super complex. One of the best ways that I can tell you that is the easiest for me to do a wireframe is just with pencil and paper, right? And just sitting down and kind of drawing it out. And the idea is basically that you're going to come up with a plan before you try to implement. And so since PowerPoint is sort of this software that really every one of you have, I wanted to try to do something here in PowerPoint to demonstrate wireframing. So I don't want to add a bunch of graphics. I don't want to add a bunch of colors. I want to keep it simple. I'm just kind of designing workflows, placing elements on the page where I think they should go. And so you can kind of start doing that in PowerPoint by just roughing in shapes. So if I go to my insert, my insert tab on my ribbon, and I select shapes, I can just start to kind of draw in shapes and bring a website out to be kind of what I want. And I am going to change this to just be a black stroke with transparent on the inside. And I could think, okay, I want this to be my header. I can make I can just kind of copy and paste this. Come in here, place it where I want it. Maybe I want a navigation to go here. Maybe a body here. Maybe a footer down here, right? And I'm just starting to kind of rough in the different areas of my site. And one of the things that I would suggest that you do is kind of go in and label these different sections. So in PowerPoint, that kind of becomes pretty easy because I can just go in and double click the shape and start to type in what these areas are. Another thing I might do, just so this part takes less prevalence, is take and make that just a lighter color so it's not as big and bold. But then this would be my nav section. And you can see one of the things that I'm doing here is that I'm actually using the tags that I'm going to use in my code to label these items. Again, all we're really trying to do with a wireframe is just establish a layout and a workflow and prepare ourselves for actually getting in there and coding. So I don't necessarily want to worry myself with real text. I don't want to worry myself with pictures. I just want to create a skeleton that I can go in and make real later. Like maybe I'm going to want a video on this in this main section, right? So I can kind of rough in a box where I'd want a video to go. Maybe I want a video to go right here. Maybe I want to have my main section actually come in a little bit. Instead of being full width, so I have sort of a gutter for the page there. And put my video here. Again, we'll change this to a transparent fill. I could take these and extend them full width. Right, and again, I'm just drawing out a website here, basically. So one of the things that you might want to do is add a little icon to things like videos. So that it's easier to tell what they are. So in my insert panel, you will see that there's a little icons palette here. Typically, I will search for interface here because there are nice interface icons here. And we should be able to find something in here that is video related, right? We can see some stuff going on here. So here's a play button, for example. I might want to insert this play button and stick it right there to indicate that this is a video. If I have a picture that I want to put somewhere, maybe I want a logo to go, say, right here roughly. I can put in here that I want this to be my logo. I can also use that little icon bar I believe there's an interface element that works for this. Here it is. And I throw that in there to indicate that this is an image. Right? And so no colors, just trying to make it super simple. Some other things that I might want to do is just like throw a text box in here and put some lorem ipsum in it. Right, so maybe I want some text here. I can use a lorem ipsum generator website, like loremipsum.io, to get myself a couple paragraphs of text. And just pop it in the box. I can add, remove text as I want to, right? Like this is just to give us an indication of what's going here. You know, another thing is that this is static, while your website is not going to be. You know, maybe this part right here, I want it to indicate some sort of heading. I'll make it a little bit bigger, make it a little bold. You know, I might also want to put the little nav elements on my navigation here, right? Like, you're just trying to communicate a plan. And that's the biggest thing there with your wireframe. You know, this is going to help you think through where everything goes. This is going to help you problem solve without being clouded by, you know, trying to find the right image. You know, just, is it balanced? You know, do you have everything? Does it make sense? And then once you have that, then you can start trying to make that into an actual website. And so that is where we'll stop today. I told you it would be relatively short. You know, again, you don't have to use PowerPoint for this. You don't have to use any software at all for this. You could simply use pencil and paper if that's the easiest for you. But that is all that I have for you today. I'll hang out here a couple minutes just in case anybody has any questions. If you're watching the recording and you have any questions, please send me an email or a Teams message. Let me know. But again, that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.